Shen Yun is a Chinese performance group that dazzles Western audiences using a wide range of colors, elaborate costumes, classical Chinese music, and traditional dance, while claiming to recover 5,000 years of history, presenting an image of China before communism. Shen Yun is owned and operated by the Falun Gong, a far-right anti-communist cult that rejects modern science, women's rights, racial equality, and embraces a worldview fueled by outlandish conspiracy theories similar to QAnon. Falun Gong uses Shen Yun as a propaganda tool to push a narrative of how communism has brought decades of deceit, violence, and destruction to Chinese society, values, and identity. Falun Gong leader Li Hongji resides in the organization's multi-million-dollar headquarters, not in China, but in Deer Park, New York. And while his followers regard him as a godlike figure, he is in reality a tool of the CIA, sharing a common hostility to the Communist Party and People's Republic of China. This video is not about the Falun Gong, but seeks to address the anti-communist lies it spreads about the condition of China before communism. China was indeed once a thriving and prosperous society. However, its dramatic decline did not begin with communism, but with the Century of Humiliation, a period of foreign invasion and internal strife prior to the establishment of the People's Republic of China. To grasp this reality, we must look beyond the spectacle of Shen Yun, derive truth from fact, and delve into the concrete history of China before communism.
The same was true of pre-revolutionary China. Henry Rosemont, he notes that when the communists liberated Shanghai from the US-sponsored Kuomintang reactionary government in 1949, the communists found that about 20% of the population in Shanghai, 1.2 million people, were drug addicts. And every morning, special crews of street cleaners, quote, would gather up the corpses of children and adults who had been murdered during the night or died of disease, cold, and starvation.
The Qing dynasty, once a symbol of Chinese power and prestige, was subjected to immense internal and external pressure throughout the 19th century. The Qing government and society was based on a commitment to traditions which often prevented modernization efforts during the Industrial Revolution. China's military suffered as a result, greatly falling behind the technological capabilities of its rivals. The first major blow to the Qing dynasty emerged through the opium trade. As a pharmaceutical substance, opium had deep roots in Chinese culture, but as its popularity grew as a recreational drug, the commodity became a focal point of global economic interests. Until 1830, China enjoyed a favorable trade balance in the global opium market, with a constant flow of silver coming in from India, Britain, and the US. But once Britain's East India Company opened hundreds of thousands of poppy plantations in colonies like India and Java, a vast enterprise emerged, yielding profits so large as to tip the balance of trade with China. In 1822, China imported roughly 347 tons of opium. By 1863, opium imports had increased to 4,232 tons, and by 1880 had reached 6,500 tons. This large increase in the opium supply not only undermined China's economic interest in the market, but caused widespread addiction and social harm to the Chinese population as well. The Qing dynasty attempted to curtail the social harms of opium by imposing laws against the sale or consumption of the drug, and passed storage regulations which came into direct conflict with British interests. In 1839, responding to the growing opium crisis, China's imperial commissioner, Lin Zexu, ordered the destruction of over 1,000 tons of illegal British opium stored in China. The British, seeking to maintain or maximize gain from this lucrative market, used Zexu's orders as a justification to wage war against China. The First Opium War ended in devastation for China, with 18,000 killed and harsh terms imposed by the Treaty of Nanking, which required China to open its trade ports, legalize foreign opium storage, and surrender Hong Kong to Britain. In China, the Treaty of Nanking is regarded as the first out of 23 unequal treaties that China was forced to sign throughout the Century of Humiliation. The unequal treaties imposed one-sided terms on China, such as ceding land, paying reparations, opening trade ports, abolishing tariffs, legalizing opium imports, or granting extraterritorial privileges to foreigners. Resistance to the Qing dynasty began to grow shortly after China's defeat in the First Opium War, and culminated in the Taiping Rebellion of 1850. The rebellion was led by Hong Xiuquan, who, claiming to be the brother of Jesus Christ, sought to spread Christianity throughout China. His heavenly kingdom ruled over roughly 30 million Chinese at its peak, and threatened to overthrow the Qing dynasty and revolutionize the entire Chinese social order. For 14 years, both sides committed atrocities against the other, engaging in the utmost brutality, even against civilian populations. The Qing government ultimately crushed the uprising in 1871, but 20 to 30 million people, roughly 5 to 10% of China's total population, was killed in the bloody conflict. It was the deadliest battle of the 19th century, and one of the deadliest in human history. Throughout the Taiping Rebellion, the Qing government was occupied not only with civil war, but foreign military threats as well. In 1856, British authorities seized a Chinese merchant vessel off the coast of Canton under suspicion of piracy. The Chinese sailors were cleared and freed, but tensions continued to rise until 1 month later, British Marines launched an unprovoked attack on Canton forts, sparking the beginning of the Second Opium War. The Second Opium War lasted until 1860, when British and French troops occupied the Qing Emperor's Imperial Summer Palace and Old Winter Palace, looting them both and destroying the latter. The war saw approximately 30,000 Chinese killed or wounded, and once again ended in China's defeat. The Chinese were forced to pay 8 million taels to Britain and France. Kowloon was surrendered to the British-owned Hong Kong. The opium trade was legalized, and foreign Christian missionaries were granted full civil rights, including the right to own property and the right to evangelize. The Second Opium War had a devastating effect on China's economy and its military, resulting in a domino effect that would last for decades to come. The Sino-French War, fought from 1884 to 1885, saw China and France vying for control over northern Vietnam, with France's naval superiority and alliances with other Western powers leading to its triumph. The British Sikkim expedition of 1888 saw the expulsion of Tibetan forces from the Kingdom of Sikkim, which reshaped the borders and cemented British influence in the region. The First Sino-Japanese War, starting in 1894, saw Japan's modern military swiftly defeating China and conquering territories in Taiwan and Korea, marking a great turning point in East Asian power dynamics. In December 1897, Kaiser Wilhelm II declared his intent to seize territory in China, which triggered a scramble for concessions among the colonial powers. The Russian occupation of Liaodong in 1898 granted Russia control over a Chinese port, while Russia's later invasion of Manchuria in 1900 saw an extermination campaign through a wave of anti-Chinese pogroms. In 1905, the Japanese seized China's Liaodong port from Russia, and in 1907, China suffered the worst famine in human history, with 25 million people perishing from starvation. In 1894, responding to Japanese aggression, the revived China Society was founded by Dr. Sun Yat-sen to bring prosperity and modernization to China. Sun Yat-sen, widely regarded as the father of modern China, called for the overthrow of the Qing dynasty in favor of a modern nation-state, believing that the empire could not be sufficiently reformed. In 1899, Sun's opening emerged in the form of the Boxer Rebellion, which was an anti-imperialist and anti-Christian uprising led by a group of martial artists called the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists. The Boxers hated the special privileges and status granted to foreigners and Christian missionaries, in contrast to the everyday Chinese. The movement spread across northern China as Boxers destroyed foreign property and murdered Christian missionaries under the slogan, "Support the Qing government and destroy the foreigners." The Qing government was able to use the Boxer Rebellion as leverage in diplomatic negotiations with foreign powers, because the Boxers held loyalty to the Manchu leadership. However, this sentiment was overturned by the Wuchang Uprising in October 1911, which sought to replace the Qing dynasty with a new republican form of government. The 1911 revolution, with Sun Yat-sen as one of its major leaders, was ultimately successful in toppling the Qing dynasty and ushering in a new republican era in Chinese politics. The collapse of the Qing dynasty in the aftermath of the revolution was a turning point in Chinese history and marked the beginning of the end of the Century of Humiliation. However, the greatest devastation was still yet to come, as China's new revolutionary government was undermined by various power struggles, including attempts to restore the Qing dynasty. From 1912 to 1915, China's republican government would be ruled by Yuan Shigai, who came to power after assuring Sun Yat-sen that Qing leadership would be dissolved under his rule. However, shortly after securing power, he outlawed Sun's Kuomintang Nationalist Party, dissolved the National Assembly, and in 1915 appointed himself emperor. After Yuan's death 1 year later, a political vacuum opened and power struggles emerged across various regions, giving rise to China's Warlord era. Meanwhile, Japan, emboldened by its victories, sought to extend its control over China through aggressive diplomatic maneuvers. In 1915, under threat of military intervention, Japan issued China 21 demands, essentially demanding that China surrender its sovereignty. Japan's 21 demands sparked widespread outrage among the Chinese public, culminating in a nationwide boycott of Japanese goods, severely impacting Japan's economy and tarnishing its reputation in the eyes of its allies. After World War I, the May 4th movement of 1919, born out of student protests in Beijing, came to symbolize a resurgence of Chinese nationalism and defiance against foreign encroachment. The movement not only rallied against the Treaty of Versailles, but also laid the political and ideological groundwork for the establishment of the Communist Party of China in 1921. Meanwhile, Sun Yat-sen's Kuomintang Party became the first government of modern China, marking a great turning point in Chinese politics. With its platform of nationalism, democracy, and socialism, the Kuomintang emerged as a unifying party, with many communists, including Mao Zedong, joining the left wing of the party. Under the recommendation of the Soviet Union, the Kuomintang and the Communists allied with each other to combat warlordism through the formation of a united front. Unlike the Communist Party or the Kuomintang, warlords were solely driven by self-interest and were particularly ruthless in dealing with their populations. Zhang Zhongchang, for example, was a Chinese warlord who was notorious for his hobby of crushing in the heads of prisoners with his sword, what he called smashing melons. Warlords enforced a brutal system of tax collection, whereby many peasants were forced to sell their wives and daughters into prostitution in order to pay rent. Zhang himself had so many sex slaves he addressed them by numbers. Due to their smaller militias, warlords were relatively easy targets, and defeating them allowed the Kuomintang and Communists to better equip themselves and grow their military power. However, the Kuomintang and the Communists always held fundamental political differences that boiled beneath the surface of cooperation. By 1927, as the near-total collapse of warlordism was in sight, the new leader of the Kuomintang, Chiang Kai-shek, launched an anti-communist purge, sparking a civil war between the two parties and forcing the communists on the Long March. In 1934, the Kuomintang mobilized hundreds of thousands of troops against the communists in an all-out extermination campaign. The communists were forced to retreat through the southern province of Guangdong, through treacherous landscapes, marching for months on end until reaching the northern city of Yan'an 1 year later. Throughout the Long March, the communists continued to liberate peasants from warlords and recruit them into the Red Army, regrowing their numbers for another eventual confrontation with the Kuomintang. As civil war brought violence and destruction on the home front, Japan took the opportunity to once again attack the weakened China. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria and established a puppet state, and in 1937 launched a full-scale invasion on the rest of China, marking the beginning of the Second Sino-Japanese War, or World War II in Asia. The Second Sino-Japanese War is often referred to as the Asian Holocaust because of the sheer violence inflicted on almost the entire population of China. Between 1937 and 1938, after capturing the capital city of Nanking, Japanese forces proceeded to assault, loot, and indiscriminately murder all Chinese, including women, children, and the elderly. Up to 300,000 women were sexually assaulted, and up to 200,000 Chinese were murdered. The terror campaign included the mass execution of civilian populations, the arson of entire villages, and war games between soldiers, including a race to decapitate 100 Chinese. The Nanking Massacre is considered one of the most severe war crimes in human history, but was still just a single chapter in the Second Sino-Japanese War, which ended in the death of roughly 35 million Chinese. Despite these great losses, China, for the first time in 100 years, had finally defeated colonial aggression and asserted its sovereignty against Japanese fascism. The defeat of imperialist Japan was made possible by the historic formation of the Second United Front between the Kuomintang and the Communists. As the Kuomintang waged a genocidal war against the Communists, the Soviets urged both sides to cease fighting each other in order to join efforts against Japan. Naturally weary of Chiang Kai-shek's hatred of communism, Mao agreed with the necessity of national unity in order to defeat the Japanese imperialists and agreed to cooperate with their domestic enemy. In the aftermath of the Second Sino-Japanese War, Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek engaged in peace talks, which quickly broke down and led to a new period of civil war. Facing a massive assault from the Kuomintang in 1946, the Communists were forced to adopt a passive defense strategy relying on guerrilla warfare to wear down their opponents. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, the Communists possessed a key advantage: support from the Soviet Union, which provided military aid and other crucial assistance to the Communists. As the conflict dragged on, the tide began to turn in favor of the Communists. Symbolic victories were secured in northern cities, and eventually the Communists recaptured village after village, then city after city, until finally reaching the capital. By 1949, the Kuomintang was on the brink of defeat, retreating to Taiwan, where they established a brutal regime and unleashed the White Terror. Meanwhile, Mao Zedong declared the establishment of the People's Republic of China, marking the end of the Century of Humiliation. The Century of Humiliation weighs heavy on the collective memory of China, and national rejuvenation remains at the forefront of China's governance. To achieve national rejuvenation, the Communist Party of China recognizes that old internal wounds need to be healed through stability, harmony, cooperation, and a foreign policy of peace. Under the leadership of the Communist Party, the nation has embarked on a radical path of reconstruction. Between 1949 and 1989, Chinese life expectancy nearly doubled from 36 to 68. Infant mortality fell from 25% to 4%. Literacy increased from 20 to over 90%, and overall consumption of cereals increased by 20%, while pork consumption tripled. The Communist Party of China continues to work with international partners to pursue policies and relationships that yield mutual benefits, while taking conscious steps to avoid confrontation wherever possible. China has not dropped a bomb on another country in over 40 years. It has retained a neutral position on international and regional conflicts, and has consistently positioned itself as a neutral peace broker between nations. Even though 75 years have passed since the founding of the People's Republic of China, the Communist Party still has begrudged enemies both within China and abroad. And while cooperation is the preferred path, China is also taking significant steps to build its defense capabilities and ensure, through one way or another, that it will never be forced back into another century of humiliation like it was before communism.